Hello and welcome to Business Standards Morning Show. I am Ruchika Chitravanshi and let us take a look at the stories for today. Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently said that his government will be less involved in the business of business. He was actually reasserting the government's old stand. While presenting the budget early this year, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had announced the government's new disinvestment policy. It has promised to keep bare minimum presence in specified strategic sectors and privatize the rest. Let us see how the centre is moving ahead with its privatization plan.
A week ago, the government announced the sale of Central Electronics Limited to little-known Nandal Finance and Leasing for 210 crore rupees. The sale was the culmination of the government's 5-year-old struggle to divest its 100% stake in the company, known for manufacturing solar cells and modules. This marked the second strategic privatization this financial year after Air India. FY21 is turning out to be a pivotal year for the government's privatization program. To help with this, the government in July brought the Department of Public Enterprises, or DPE, under the Ministry of Finance. It was previously under the Ministry of Heavy Industries and Public Enterprises. This move increased the Finance Ministry's control over public sector undertakings, or PSUs, and quickened the implementation of privatization proposals. The Department of Public Enterprises monitors the performance of PSUs and reviews their capital expenditure. Now, the centre is set to rejig the privatization process for companies in non-strategic sectors. This includes steel, tourism, urban development, and healthcare sectors. Under the new Public Sector Enterprises policy, companies in such sectors will be considered for privatization wherever feasible, else they would be shut down. The Department of Public Enterprises, now under the Finance Ministry, has been tasked with identifying the public sector enterprises in the non-strategic sectors for this purpose. Its recommendations are then sent to the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, or DIPAM, which too comes under the Finance Ministry. Not just this, to create more value out of state-owned assets, the government has come up with a monetization plan. The National Monetization Pipeline has been prepared by Niti Aayog. And to elaborate on this subject, the think tank's CEO Amitabh Kant spoke to Business Standard.
Asset monetization is an innovative methodology that government has embarked upon for unlocking value of investments in public sector. The concept is based on the philosophy of creation through monetization, which will tap institutional investments and long-term patient capital into stable, mature assets. This in turn will generate financial resources to be leveraged for new infrastructure asset creation by the government. The Niti Aayog, in consultation with concerned ministry, has prepared the National Monetization Pipeline, and the pipeline aims to enable a systematic approach towards recycling of capital. This has already been successfully explored in sectors such as roads and airports through PPP models. The objective is now to systematically adopt this in other sectors with learning from these experiences.
While the government has set a target of raising 1.75 lakh crore rupees through disinvestment in FY21, it has so far mopped up only about 9,500 crore rupees. Reports suggest that the big-ticket privatization of Bharat Petroleum is likely to be completed next fiscal. But the centre is looking to finalize the sale of at least 4 companies, including Shipping Corporation of India, BEML, Pawan Hans, and Neelachal Ispat Nigam by March 2022. With regard to the sale of 2 public sector banks, the government is starting to face pushback from employee unions. But the government, nevertheless, is going ahead with legislative amendments to facilitate the sale. This indicates that despite COVID disruptions, the government's disinvestment program is on the right track.
After India, let us see what the world's leading search engine company is up to. In the making for years, Google's smartwatch is likely to be released sometime next year, if reports are to be believed. And there seems to be an Indian tinge to it, as the watch has been codenamed Rohan. How different will this health gadget be from those being offered by Apple, which is dominating the smartwatch segment since 2015? Will it set the pulse racing? Our next report tries to find this out.
They now keep a tab on our intimate body functions like heartbeat, sleep pattern, steps taken, and calories burned. Just like the phones, watches have also evolved with technology. Ranging from 2000 rupees to 1 lakh rupees or even more, the smartwatch segment is full of varieties being offered by a range of companies like Apple, Samsung, OnePlus, Noise, Boat, etc. Now, according to several reports, internet search giant Google is also set to make its debut. So far, Google had only been developing software for smartwatches. But now it is moving, slowly but steadily, in the direction of making its own device. In January this year, it acquired the health and fitness device maker Fitbit for a whopping $2.1 billion. Later, in May, it announced collaboration with Samsung to bring the best of Wear OS and Tizen OS in a single unified platform. And Google's efforts towards its wearable business resulted in significant growth in its market share. According to a recent Counterpoint Research report, Wear OS shipments stood at 17.3% in Q3. This was a significant jump from just 3.1% in the first half of this year, according to IDC. So what is Google really trying to achieve with its reported entry into the smartwatch space? We spoke to Prabhu Ram, Head of Industry Intelligence Group at Cybermedia Research, to understand.
So Google has traditionally enjoyed a strong dominant edge when it comes to its software. On the other hand, its hardware strategy is fairly nascent. It's still a work in progress. It has faltered in the past, and that's something which it's trying to currently navigate as such. When you look at the smartwatch segment itself, what Google has been able to do is, with the Fitbit acquisition, it's been able to address that part of the puzzle when it comes to the hardware. Alongside, what Google has been able to gain is a strong expertise in health tech from Fitbit, which, when complemented with its own in-house capabilities, really comes out as a strong USP for its smartwatches. And what Google would be trying to achieve with this potential smartwatch in 2022 is basically to demonstrate what a successful marriage between strong software and strong hardware would mean for the consumers, for the partners, and for the market at large.
According to reports, Google was about to launch a Pixel smartwatch in 2016. But the idea was shelved after the company's hardware boss, Rick Olsterlaw, objected to its design, which he said didn't look like one from the Pixel family. In its current form, Google's Wear OS may have fragmentation issues similar to Android. Samsung, Fossil, and Garmin are three big names in the tech industry that use Google Wear OS platform in their respective smartwatches. However, none of them delivers a cohesive experience. Some of the core functions of the Samsung Galaxy Watch 4 running the latest version of Wear OS are restricted to Samsung smartphones. Fossil's latest generation smartwatch runs a dated version of Wear OS. The same is the case with Garmin. So, will Google be able to address the fragmentation issue?
Probably, maybe over the long term, it might help in addressing this issue. As of today, I don't see that as the situation, but we can be fairly optimistic that hopefully, if all these experiments do come to the fruition, we might see for the sake of the consumers also, Wear OS really emerge on top.
According to media reports, the Google smartwatch is internally codenamed Rohan, and it's referred to as the Pixel Watch or Android Watch by the select Google executives with access to the prototype. The smartwatch has a heart rate monitor and offers basic health tracking features such as step counting. As for design, it would have a round case with no physical bezel around the display. With Facebook planning to come out with its own smartwatch, Google's wearable device will have to face a tough competition. Its design and ability to strike a chord with customers will play a crucial role in its success. As of now, however, there is no official word from Google.
Google's smartwatch is possibly the next most exciting wearable to hit the market, but the emergence of the new COVID-19 variant, Omicron, has again made the global markets uncertain. Whether the new COVID-19 wave will be inflationary or deflationary in nature will depend on country-specific infection rates and policy responses. So what will India's Reserve Bank do on Wednesday? Will it keep its gunpowder dry or will it pull the trigger by hiking rates? Let us find out.
As global central banks fear being behind the curve amid sticky inflation, India's Reserve Bank of India is huddled up on Mint Street to discuss its bi-monthly policy. The Apex Bank's monetary policy outcome, which will be announced tomorrow, assumes importance as the US Federal Reserve no longer sees inflation being transitory. That apart, economic uncertainties are also rising amid a new variant of coronavirus. In a Business Standard poll of 16 economists and bond market experts, the consensus emerged of a status quo policy on repo rate at 4% and the stance being accommodative. While 6 expected a sure hike in reverse repo rate, 10 said the rise of Omicron variant might not allow the RBI to do that. One among the 10 said a reverse repo hike could be done from outside the formal policy because it is at the sole discretion of the RBI and not within the remit of the 6-member Monetary Policy Committee. The significance of RBI Governor Shaktikant Das's statement tomorrow will be the central bank's outlook on economic recovery. The RBI has, so far, refused to hike rates, stating that any hasty withdrawal would jeopardize the nascent recovery. If the Omicron variant does not cause widespread disruption, economists expect the full-year growth expectation of RBI at 9.5% to be met. According to Sonal Verma, Chief Economist for India and Asia ex-Japan at Nomura, even though the Omicron variant does add to uncertainty, the baseline view still points to inflation rising towards the upper end of the RBI's 2 to 6% target. Given this, the brokerage expects a 40 basis point reverse repo rate hike and a cumulative 75 basis point of repo and reverse repo rate hikes in 2022. For Rahul Bajoria, Chief India Economist at Barclays, the recovery in activity levels along with signs of an elevated inflation path will push the RBI closer towards policy normalization. However, he says the pace and quantum of normalization of policy corridor remains uncertain. Therefore, in his base case scenario, the RBI may go for 20 basis point hike in the reverse repo rate in both December and February MPC meetings. In sum, the economy is recovering, but it may be difficult for the RBI to consider high inflation as transitory. Besides, nobody knows how serious the threat of Omicron is. Therefore, even if the RBI maintains a status quo in the policy, keeping a hawk eye on the evolving pandemic picture, a rate hike in February is certain if there is no third wave driven by Omicron. As regards today, equity markets may be volatile as investors remain cautious ahead of the policy outcome. Further, developments around the new coronavirus variant and policy response of various governments will also guide the market trajectory. Stock-specific news flow, global cues, and commodity prices will sway the sentiment. In the primary market, RateGain Travel Technologies Limited is opening its 3-day initial public offer today. The company has fixed a price band of Rs 405 to 425 per share and hopes to garner close to 1,336 rupees at the upper price band of the offer. The BSE Sensex fell 949 points yesterday to end the day at 56,747. The Nifty 50, on the other hand, ended 284 points lower at 16,912.
The RBI is likely to maintain its status quo on the repo rate at 4% today. But the status quo on encrypted digital messages is something the government is not comfortable with. We have heard about the Indian government's face-off with WhatsApp over the new IT rules. The government wants platforms to identify the first originator of any piece of information that jeopardizes India's security, sovereignty, or contains sexually explicit material. But this would mean breaking the end-to-end encryption of WhatsApp platform, which forms the fulcrum of its user privacy. But do we really understand what end-to-end encryption or just encryption means? Let us understand this technical concept.
Encryption is a way of scrambling data so that only authorized parties can understand the information that is being shared. In encryption, human-readable plain text is converted into incomprehensible text, also called ciphertext. Encryption requires the use of a cryptographic key, a set of mathematical values that both the sender and the recipient of an encrypted message agree on. To decrypt this data, the sender and the receiver of the message have a key. Only this key can be used to decrypt the data. That ensures the data remains secure. But encryption is of two types, symmetric and asymmetric. In symmetric encryption, the same key is used to encrypt and decrypt the data. Both the sender and the receiver have the same key. This could pose some problems as it could involve the sender transferring the key to the recipient and potentially exposing the key to nefarious actors. To counter this threat, we have end-to-end or asymmetric encryption. In an end-to-end encryption, the sender and the receiver have two different keys, a public key and a private key. So, on WhatsApp, if Akash sends a message to Rahul, the message is encrypted using Akash's public key. But on Rahul's end, the message can only be decrypted using Rahul's public as well as private keys. Rahul's private key is available only to Rahul, none else. What this means is that on WhatsApp, only the sender and the receiver can read their chat exchange. Not even WhatsApp can check the messages being exchanged between the two parties. It is this security feature that WhatsApp fears India's new IT rules may potentially undermine. WhatsApp says if it is required to identify the first originator of any piece of information, that would require it to store a digital signature for every message that is passed through its servers.
That's all we have for you today. We will be back with more news and analysis. Stay tuned and thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.